everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Drew Hendrickson, who is a shareholder at LBMC. Drew, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, Drew. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and how you came to be where you are today, professionally speaking?
Sure. So I started my career with Ernst & Young, and at that time it was Technology and Security Risk Services. I think they called us teasers to poke fun of us back in the day. But I started in their IT audit group, and I stayed at Ernst & Young for a large portion of my career, just right at 9 years. Had worked my way up to senior manager there. And after a long stint at Ernst & Young, I got a lot of experience around project management, as well as what I might call more typical IT audit roles. So I did a lot of my time supporting SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley testing, if you're not familiar with that. On the IT general control testing side, I did a lot of SOC reports and got some unique security and IT experience while I was there. And then I shifted over to LBMC. It's a accounting firm here in the Nashville area as well. And I've been here a little over 9 years now. And I started at what that time was a security team of about 13 to 15 individuals. And we have really grown that since that time and really kind of helped grow the practice here around SOC reporting. But then we started taking on a lot of other information security assurance type projects is what I would call them. So high trust certification, ISO 27001 certification. The firm already did a lot of work in PCI, already had a really great technical services team. And then we kind of also bolted on a more mature security consulting team. So at this point, we pretty much do everything in information security that you can think of from a professional services standpoint. But I specifically lead what we call our IT assurance group. So it's called a lot of different things in the industry. It might be called risk, might be called governance, risk, and compliance, IT audit. We call it IT assurance, and that primarily is our SOC practice, our high trust practice, and then our co-sourcing practice with internal audit shops that are public companies and still have that SOX compliance need.
Very cool. Yeah, so I've worked with a lot of consulting firms over the years, and I think there's often a pretty big difference between the LBMCs of the world and the Big Four. How have you found that transition going from a larger firm to a smaller firm?
Yeah, I really like the entrepreneurial aspect of it, especially when I first started. The group was, it was just smaller. And what I have really liked about it is being able to kind of help steer it and navigate it to what it is today. And that really, what it really allowed us to do is what you found a lot, or at least what I found a lot when I was in IT audit with Ernst & Young, is we hired a lot of accountants, a lot of CPAs. I have a CPA. That was my background. And so you had a really good understanding and grasp of how to audit controls. But you may or may not have had good education that gave you a solid foundation around cybersecurity and technology. And so what I did was try and change that immediately. So we started hiring individuals direct out of MIS programs, trying to find good cybersecurity programs around the country. If nothing else, an accounting program that had a really good aspect of the program that gave them some general security understanding. And so what we tried to do is really build a team that when they're sitting down to audit someone who's working in IT or security at a company, that they're talking the same language, as opposed to the IT individual at the company having to educate the auditor on what that even means. And that's probably been one of the most rewarding things for me, is to be able to build up a program that I feel like is really technically sound. I think a lot of the industry at this point is caught up, as has education. There are more cybersecurity programs out there than there used to be at more traditional universities. And a lot of the accounting programs now do offer a concentration for MIS or technology or security. So that's fantastic. And we continue to focus on that type of hiring, at least when we're recruiting on campus. And then just from an experience standpoint, finding a lot of other folks that had really in-depth good experience, whether it be from Big Four, whether it be more from a niche type of security shop or something like that, even in industry, who's been through it, right, has been audited and can really understand where they sit. So that's some of the things that I think I've really enjoyed about being at LBMC and kind of being able to lead this group.
Very cool. Yeah, I hear a lot about how consulting firms generally only tend to hire from other consulting firms, and it sounds like you're changing that up a little bit. You're actually hiring people from the client side.
Yeah, so we've done that from the client side. I call it industry, as well as that campus recruiting and trying to train up, which you did see that a lot in like the big four, and then the next tier down from there, your RSIMs and BDOs. When I came, we didn't hire on campus at all, and that was one of the first things I said. We need to do that too. Our audit shop and our tax shop started doing that. Why can't we train the next line of individuals that are going to be in this industry as well? So hiring from the client side and hiring on campus has been a really big game changer for us.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the talent gap, I think a lot of the talent gap is kind of self-inflicted, especially for consulting firms. They have a very narrow focus in who they'll hire. And I've long been a proponent from hiring from industry or the client side because, again, those folks understand they've been on the other end of it. The usual pushback I hear from that is they can't handle the pace of our consulting organization. How do you address that? I guess as a consulting firm, do you see that same sort of issue with hiring from that side?
Yeah, so I think one thing is the transparency of what the pace might look like in professional services versus industry. The other thing is how is the professional services firm controlling that pace for their own employees? It's a deadline driven industry. There's no doubt about that. But it doesn't mean that your employees have to work 80 hours a week every single week. There's a way to balance that culture even within a professional services firm. And that really kind of boils down to how are we protecting our own people? So are we taking on too much at once? Are we being transparent in the sales cycle on, yeah, we can definitely get started next week. You're ready to do that next week. You have to get it done next week. Let's do it. As opposed to being realistic, like, hey, I'd love if I can shake things around and we can get it to work next week. I hear that's what you need. We'll try and do that. But, typically we schedule 4 to 6 to maybe 8 weeks out. And so if that's too late for you, that may just not be the best fit for us right now, because you don't want to over inundate your own people. So one is that. Another way that we've done it, I actually have an intern right now who's in the office here with me, who came from industry, and that's how we're kind of balancing that. Hey, you've never been in this role before. Would you be interested in an internship to really kind of learn what it's about? Is this pace something that you're going to be comfortable with in a full-time position before we move into that full-time role? So that's another way, is that kind of gives us experience, and it gives that professional some experience working in professional services and making sure that they're going to be comfortable with it, as opposed to starting in a new role that they knew nothing about and kind of getting burnt out. So a lot of times, traditionally, you might only think of an internship for somebody who's a sophomore or junior in college or between their graduate degree and that summer there. But it's okay to do it with somebody who's got a lot of work experience as well. It's a really great way, if they're comfortable with that, getting experience on both sides.
That's some really creative hiring that you're doing there. I've
Yeah.
found that, like I said, most consulting firms are a little bit more narrow in their focus. So that's a great way to broaden your candidate pool and consider somebody that maybe not all the other firms are constantly knocking down their door trying to hire. And so, you get real dedicated employees that way. You get loyalty. You're willing to take a chance on people. And I know your retention is phenomenal as well. And that's, I think, another big part of the talent gap. If people are switching jobs every 6 months to make more salary or whatever the case may be, or maybe they didn't, maybe the job was misrepresented in the interview process and it wasn't what it was supposed to be or
Mm-hmm.
sold to them as. I see that a lot. But you guys have, from what I've seen, done a great job of hanging on to people. So how are you doing that? What would you attribute your success and retention to with all these great people that you hire?
Yeah, it's every time somebody would talk about the Great Recession, I'd kind of look around and be like, I'm not personally experiencing it, so I don't have a lot to comment on it outside of what I read and what I hear from other colleagues, either in industry or in professional services. And I look around for the most solid piece of wood around me to knock on as well, because I want to make sure that we're continuing to do the right thing. Because yeah, we've continued to see very, very light turnover. Our retention rate, especially for a professional services firm, has been outstanding. We have always maintained that pretty much in the single digits. I think our last number was around 6% year over year. So we've been able to maintain really high retention, and I think it's a lot of different things that we do. Culturally, number one, speaking of the talent gap, even before COVID, we were very open to remote employees. So about a third of our workforce, even pre 2020, was already remote. So we were already very good at working remotely, internally and with our clients. So that was really helpful when we went through that. We didn't have to pivot, right? We already knew how to do that. So that helps us find even more talent. We're not limited to just one geographic section or region of the country. So we have a lot of purposeful and intentional ways of reaching out to employees, whether they're already here or whether they're remote. And I think one of the biggest differences that I've seen there, because I've worked at least one other firm, and I've had a lot of colleagues that have worked a lot of other places and gotten their feedback, but just the way that we communicate when we do meet, because you have to meet, you have to not just weekly or monthly, but there's got to be consistent touch points, but they have to be very intentional, and they almost have to be vulnerable and transparent as well. And we've always been that way. So very open to things in discussions around even items that I feel like are just now maybe starting to gain traction in more of the corporate world. Mental health being one of those, and having a great program as a company around that, but then also understanding if someone's going through something personally and they need a little bit more of a flexible work arrangement in the short term. Maybe they need it more long term too, but being able to pivot and work with them in those types of situations, I think has meant a lot. Because if you go through something with someone, it's not just, hey, you're performing poorly, we need to work on a performance improvement plan, and then the next thing you know, they're out the door. But hey, what's going on? Like, is there something personally going on? Being really vulnerable in those conversations, and then a lot of times it's, oh, well, if I'd have known that, I could have helped you a long time ago. And then you not only help them in their personal lives and perform better as an employee, but then you just think about the loyalty that you're building with them as an individual. So that's really meant a lot. And then the other things are just the things that I think you have to do, because we do have a large remote workforce. We do get together. We've always tried to get together at least quarterly. We don't make anybody, if you've already got a vacation scheduled or you do have a big client on site that week and it was already scheduled beforehand, there's not much you can do about that. So it's always been optional, but most people have always tended to opt into getting together and spending that time, because while we can work remote, there's almost nothing that replaces that in-person time for a long length of time, to be able to really connect with your team, be able to get to know them better personally, and really develop those relationships. So those are some of the biggest things that I think have really helped us. And the other thing is just being willing to listen and pivot very quickly for our employees. So I've had an employee who he worked for LBMC help desk. He wanted to be a pen tester. And our technical services team said, we don't have any opening right now. I don't have any way to get you on our team right now, maybe down the road, but from a qualification standpoint, there's not a lot there either. And I don't have any other, staff openings for that side. And I said, an interim solution might be, do you want to come work for our IT assurance team and start to kind of bridge that gap and then ultimately transition to the technical services team? And so he did. He worked with us for about 8 months, transitioned from the help desk over to the technical services team. And we put a quick action plan in place right away. What I've seen in other organizations is, yeah, we hear that you're interested. Be patient with us. We will get that back to you, and we'll help you out. That's right. Just keep promising and not putting an intentional act in place on how we're going to do it. And so I can tell 20 more stories like that of how we've gotten people either from IT audit to consulting or to a pen test position. And so, another thing we talk about the talent gap is from the employee side, maybe being flexible on taking another role with a company that's going to help get you there. Sometimes it may not be what you want to do every day for the rest of your career. But if you can come work with me and my team, show that you're a great employee, show that you're invested in LBMC, especially our information security practice, we're going to do everything we can to help get you the type of role that you want. It requires some personal work as well, right? But ultimately, we can get you where you want to be. And so, just that flexibility, I think, on both ends has been a big help.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is a lot of one-off individual solutions. There's no kind of sweeping thing that applies to every employee to keep them. You just have to be close enough and build that trust with them. And actually, I mean, it sounds like you actually care, about the people that work for you, and that's kind of unique. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people I talk to as a recruiter, they'll often say, I just feel like a cog in a wheel or just a number. And I think with all these tech layoffs, especially, everybody's starting to kind of wake up to the fact that they might be pretty disposable.
Yeah.
So, it definitely puts a shine or a new spin on, the firms that treat people well and people stick around for that long. Yeah, I just saw one guy had been with you guys for 5 years and he was a pretty junior candidate. That was so good to see. Because it is so rare, like you said, in professional services. So, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but the talent gap, do you, obviously your experience is mostly in audit and GRC. Do you view it as a real thing, at least within the GRC field, or, not necessarily cybersecurity overall, but specifically GRC? Do you see that being an issue?
Yeah, well, certainly from all the different trade material that I read, it's a problem industry wide. Like I said, it's not been something as much that we've experienced, and I would attribute that more to the retention. I think we have a great recruiting pipeline and plan in place, which has really helped as well. But I think the retention more than anything is what has allowed us to not deal with that as our own group. So it's hard to say because especially cybersecurity is so broad, right?
Mhm.
It's almost like you talk about oh, there's a shortage in the medical industry. It's like, what do you mean? Like, do you mean a cardiologist, a neurosurgeon, a podiatrist? Is it a nurse practitioner? What? It's so broad, and there's so much there. And when you think about even like from a middle market standpoint, you know, they really tout that it's really hard to find people. Yeah, I just can't find the right people. And I think that companies and some firms continue to really pigeonhole themselves and cause the problem themselves. Well, we're not, well, yes, but yeah, you do have to move to Nashville or you do have to move to Florida. That just is what it is. It won't work out. Maybe in the short term. And I'm starting to see more of that pick back up from what I'm hearing in the industry. It was very open to remote work for a very long time, but a lot of companies are saying, yeah, well, 2 days at home is good, but we will need you here three. So we will at some point want you to move. So you pigeonhole yourself pretty immediately if you're not going to be really open and truly buy into a remote workforce. So that hurts you. And then getting creative on who you're going to hire, and then being really able and willing to invest. At some point, you're going to say, "Well, I can't hire somebody with no experience because I don't have the time to train them." But if you don't start patching the holes in the boat, if you don't stop rowing and patch the holes, it's going to sink. So, in the short term, it may slow some things down. It could be impactful, but in the long term, not only are you helping the industry build up, but you're helping your own organization build up by patching those holes. And now you can row a whole lot faster. So, it's that mindset that I think a lot of individuals in this industry have to pick up on. But there's no doubt. I mean, cybersecurity as an industry just continues to grow at a very fast pace every single year. And so that's creating a lot more opportunities, a lot more competition. And that's where that retention becomes so important because pay is important. It is important, and you do have to be competitive on the pay, but it's not the end all be all. That culture, and being able to retain your employees beyond just the number gets really important, because if it's just about pay, they will leave. There's always, always, always someone that will pay more, especially in a competitive landscape like cybersecurity.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, you have to offer employees something that they can't get anywhere else. You have
Yeah.
to, stand out as an employer in some way, and flexibility, to sum it all up, is a big piece of that. Trust building with employees, listening to people, a lot of intangibles and a lot of stuff that doesn't cost you a lot of money.
Yeah.
One thing that can cost you some money, though, is building that entry level pipeline. And obviously, it was something super important to you from the very beginning. How did you, in the beginning, justify building that entry level pipeline with a focus on the long term, when often there's a focus on quarterly profits and filling that seat immediately? Like, how did
Yeah.
you vouch for that plan to get that done?
Yeah, so from having the professional services mindset and consulting mindset, it'd be a little bit easier for me than someone in industry. But what I was able to pitch is, listen, that these are junior level employees who have never been in this profession before. Their salary is going to relate to a lower bill rate, so it's not going to cost us as much money. And in the long run, it also gives us a lot more leverage. So we don't have to be the most expensive anymore when we're going out and doing a pen test or doing a SOC audit or doing a high trust certification. We've got the leverage to be able to lower that price and still provide what I would call a big four value, because you've got that experience and that team behind them. Um, so, from a leverage standpoint, it just made a lot of business sense to me to be able to stay competitive in the market and not just be a high expensive niche security service, but really be something that could grow, to a national level, which really at this point has been done, which is great. So I think that maybe that's somewhat unfair, but being able to pitch that leverage is what really helped me. And then I might kind of go back to, if you were looking at it a different way, if you're just like a cost center, what other value will that individual bring to the organization? Because number one, it might already be a problem, right? Well, I can't even get everything done that I need to get done for my plan for the year. And now I might not be addressing other risks within the organization that I had hoped to or planned to do. And if you kind of stop and train some individuals up, number one, the cost probably is lower if it's more on that campus front, or just 2 to 3, 4 years experience. But number two, once they get up and running, now I have more time to focus on those more kind of intrinsic value operations and processes for the company, or where are we going to be thinking about risk this next year, and really being able to give more input and showing value to the company. So it's not just, oh well, it's going to cost more money. It's not just going to cost $100,000, $120,000 more money. It's actually going to bring more value to the company and maybe save us in the long run. So it's just trying to think about it differently, and how are you pitching that value to your management team and your executives?
Yeah, fair enough. So you talked a little bit about the cost. So say somebody wants to start a new campus hire program or entry level training program, something like that. Could you ballpark how long it would take? And I know there's a lot of variables here, but how long it would take to get somebody who's truly entry level, given the right training, and get them to the point where they're up and running in a given capacity?
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
it be 6 months? Would it be a year, do you think?
I mean, I'd say to really build out a program and a pipeline, you probably are looking at more to 12 to even 24 months, where you feel like you've got a mature pipeline and those relationships at the university. But to be able to get started and maybe find someone, these universities are always looking for speakers, people to come on campus, speak to their students, talk about careers in cybersecurity right now. I mean, the accounting students want to hear about it. The cybersecurity students, the MIS students, they all want to hear about careers in cybersecurity and technology. And now you've got a lot of interest in our data team. They're called data insights, but data analytics has really blown up. So there's a lot of students interested in that. And that's kind of got this security component. And then privacy's kind of always call it like the cousin or step cousin of security. So you got a lot of interest there. So if you've got a lot of experience and you're comfortable getting up in front of students and talking to them and developing a relationship with a campus organization or a couple of professors, you might be able to pick somebody up really quick because you give one good talk and you spark interest in just one or two students. They're going to come up to you and talk to you after you give your presentation. And now all of a sudden you've built a pipeline, right? Now all of a sudden maybe you've got your next candidate who's interested in working with you. And that doesn't have to be limited to just professional services firms. I think we've always been really good at getting on campus and talking to students. And there are some companies that do a very good job of that, but a lot of times those are, your Fortune 100, Fortune 500 type companies that are doing that. If the middle market would really get involved on campus, and it doesn't have to be a lot, it can be one presentation or, sponsor a pizza night, something like that. You can drive a lot of interest really quick. And then that doesn't take a lot of money, time, or investment. And all of a sudden, you've built a really great brand for yourself on one campus.
Yeah, and if anybody watching or listening is curious about how to find some of these, passionate people that they're trying so desperately to break into the industry, nobody's giving them a shot. There's a bunch of different resources I can send you. I mean, there's people that hang out on all these different Discord channels, on subreddits. It's crazy where you can find people these days.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think just the main thing that we need to focus on as an industry is opening up those entry level jobs, finding a way to funnel more, to fill the top of the funnel of the entry level folks. So we have to make a business case, especially like you said, for the industry folks that maybe want to build a team, but they're a cost center. How do they, justify that? So one thing you'd kind of mentioned too is that there's sometimes a perception that auditors aren't the most technical, or maybe not as technical as they should be, to understand the technology that they're auditing. How do you guys go about instilling that knowledge in the people that you hire, especially if they're relatively inexperienced in the beginning?
Yeah. So one of the things that I really look for is, are you truly passionate about cybersecurity, even if you don't know anything about it? Why are you interested in it? Why do you want to work in that career? Did you just kind of learn about it and thought, yeah, I don't know if there's anything better to do. It seems like you make a lot of money in this field and I want to do that. And I've heard good things about LBMC. Like, if that's the answer, that's probably not where we're going to make a hire. I'll really want someone who has done some research, understands the industry, and is truly passionate about what's their goal, what's their why. Why do they even want to be in cybersecurity? If they are kind of geared that way, then it's going to be a lot easier to get them to buy in on the training and truly invest in them. We have a very healthy training budget for everyone individually, and everyone gets an individual coach and buddy, and their coach and buddy work with them on their unique and individual training program. And that is on top of what we already offer as a firm. So we've put together formal training on just the basics of what they're going to have to know to do their job. But then that individual training really allows them to get really in depth in what they're most interested in. So, okay, well, AWS continues to carry more risk in the cloud environment within corporate entities, especially in the middle market where you're performing SOC audits. If you're super interested in that, then let's send you some training there. Let's get you more involved in cloud security. A lot of companies still run on more legacy systems and infrastructure, and there's still good training for that, where a lot of risk, and a lot of times that's where some of the biggest vulnerabilities are. Everybody wants to always learn the new stuff. They don't always think about the legacy stuff, and that's really where a lot of the risks are. So learning about that. So there's a lot. So it's really kind of getting to know the individual and where's their passion, and how do we ensure that we're investing in that passion that's not only going to help them as a professional and a resume builder, but then brings really, really great value to what we're bringing, not only to our audits, but helping companies, across the globe with their information security risk management program, and helping them mature their posture within that environment.
Gotcha. So yeah, it sounds like you have kind of a three-pronged approach. You have the standardized training, you have the uh, hands-on specific technical training that you will, I guess, send them to, whether it be a certification or boot
Mhm.
camp or something, and then you have their buddy or mentor, whoever that is on a, you know, regular basis that they're shadowing and working with. That's
Yeah.
a that's a great approach. Yeah, and I think a lot of people they justify their not training people because they know it's going to take some time and investment.
Yeah.
It's going to take one of their more seasoned people sitting down with that person on a regular basis and showing them the ropes and a lot of the intangibles. I always tell people they have no idea how difficult it is to train a recruiter. I can't even imagine, an IT auditor. There's just so much to know, especially when you're a consultant and you're looking at different environments every day. Um, you have to be able to learn very quickly, and that's where
Mhm.
that passion comes in. And I would imagine too, you're also looking for some level of intellect, and I'm sure that comes through when you're first interviewing somebody or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Absolutely.
so you hire obviously at the entry level, you hire at the mid and senior levels. When it comes to the mid and senior levels, that to me is where the talent shortage is. That's where
Mhm.
most companies struggle to hire. And it's the magical 2 to 10 years of experience somewhere in there. Everybody wants to hire a senior consultant, not a manager. Um, so when you look for those folks, how do you evaluate them? For instance, certs versus experience versus degrees. Do you weight any of those more heavily than others?
Yeah, that's where I, in the industry, I call that the unicorn. That senior consultant. Everybody wants one. Nobody has enough. Um, I think the biggest thing that I look for is not the degree or the certification. It would really be more the experience, um, and not just their experience professionally, but if this is something that they want to do, what else have they maybe done individually with their own research or studying, and a lot of times that does end up resulting in certifications. Certifications are good, and especially from a sales standpoint and from an overall firm credibility standpoint, they're necessary and they are good. They are not ultimately the main thing you have to get the job. At least that's not the way that I've ever approached it. We'll help you get a certification once you get here. To me, it's really more the experience, and the know-how, individual drive, and what they want to bring to the table, as opposed to degree and or certification. That there's also a lot of programs out there where maybe it's not a formal degree. We hired a new staff that didn't have a college degree, but she was going to Wake Forest and getting a cyber security program that's kind of separate than their formal undergraduate degree. So there's a lot of different offerings out there as well, either like associate degrees or other certificates or programs that you might research and invest in. So there's a lot of different ways to think about that. I think just being open to it is the main thing. Just being open to not putting yourself in, okay, they have to have this, this, and this, and being willing to accept resumes that might look a little bit different, that you might have said, oh no, well, that doesn't fit my criteria, so that's not going to work. Just that general openness, that's where you really shore up that talent gap, because there's a lot of people with a lot of talent that want to break into this industry. There's as many people that want to break in the industry as there are the open roles that people say they just can't fill. And so there's what's happening there, right? There's got to be a way to bridge that.
Yeah, I see it as, I call it kind of the talent bottleneck, because what's happening is there's tens of thousands of people trying to break in, but there's not enough entry level roles in
Mhm.
which for them to filter into. But then so there's kind of that bottleneck there. But then once you look at 3 5 years of experience, that's where all the demand is. But if
Mhm.
we don't hire enough people at the entry level, they're not going to be there's not enough people to get experience to fill those 3 to 5 years of experience roles that everybody needs to fill. So
Yep.
it's the longer term focus. It's kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. Everybody kind of says it's it's not my problem. I'll just hire somebody experienced. Somebody else can train them. But if more companies don't start training, we're all going to be worse off. So that's kind of my crusade, I guess, for this podcast.
Yeah. And if you really do, if you can't start there, and sometimes that is what it is, you have to have somebody with 3 to 5 years experience. Maybe you've already got two individuals at the entry level and you're training them up and you've invested in that, but you truly do need that more 2 to 10 year level of experience. Well, now you also have to invest in that, right? You need to be competitive from a salary standpoint. You might need to look at working with a recruiter, and those things cost money. And if you're not willing to invest in it, then you might not get the person to fill that need. So, you have to be willing to invest to get the people that you want. And it seems a lot of times really daunting, and it seems like, well, that just seems insurmountable. I don't know how we could justify that cost. And it's business. You do have to figure out how you're going to justify it, but look beyond that first month of what that cost is going to be. Look at the revenue that could be generated out of that for a year. Look at the value that could bring to your organization for the next year to 2 years. And when you look at that it usually far outweighs any of that initial investment that you need to put in to find that 3 to 5 year kind of senior candidate.
For sure. Yeah, and I always, say that you should be more open-minded in hiring, kind of like you had alluded to, thinking outside the box a little bit. If you if you broaden the candidate pool and nobody else does, you're going to get people that might not look as much like a fit on paper, but could be a better employee for you long term and could stick around long term. And then you save money on turnover. If you find people that match the right motivators. So as a recruiter, I spend a lot of time on motivators. I think it's the most important part of recruiting somebody is understanding why they would consider a move. And if your job actually solves a problem for them, that's kind of the root of sales or recruiting is, are you solving a problem for somebody? And if your role is not solving a problem for them, they're not going to stick around long term.
Yeah.
And you said the salary thing, there's always somebody paying more, and it's a relatively easy fix just to throw more money at somebody. But if you can match somebody's need for flexibility for their family, say they have an elderly parent that lives at home, so they need to work different hours or something like that, that's relatively free for the hiring manager to accommodate that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, awesome. I guess you could probably tell me quite a few stories as a hiring manager, like you had kind of alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
Could you reference maybe a few of your greatest accomplishments as a hiring manager?
The one young lady that I referenced that doesn't have a traditional degree, moved to America after living in Brazil, and was working at a fast food restaurant, and thought cybersecurity might be something that she would want to work in one day. And she found a really good mentor in her own hometown. And through that, individual was introduced to us. And this is someone that, on paper, traditionally in a traditional setting, you probably be like, oh, even for a new staff candidate, they don't have a degree. This is not something that I think I would even think about. And we talked to her and were really impressed. The drive and the motivation and the work ethic, and holy cow, and just super personable. I mean, a really, really awesome person. And we were able to make a full-time offer to her, and she's still here and doing a tremendous job. That one is one that really, kind of touches my heart. And it changed her life, and she'll always be, I hope, grateful for that. And we're internally grateful for the opportunity, and blessed to have her on our team. So that's one that I really love. And then just, every individual that I've hired off of campus that has now come into a management role, and I see them on I join a status call with a client, or a kickoff call, or a closeout call, and I don't even have to say much besides hello, because they're truly managing the project and doing a really great job. And I've seen them flourish as individuals and in their own careers. That's really, I love every single one of those stories. I have a lot of those stories and individuals that work here at LBMC. And then we've had several individuals who worked here. Like I said, our retention, it's not 100%. The retention rate's pretty good, but it's not 100%. We've had a lot of individuals that worked here, went off to either somewhere in industry, one of our clients, or another professional services firm, and had a conversation with them. Okay, well, we don't want you to leave. We understand that you're interested and you want to go try this out, but if that ever changes, give us a call back. And it has blown my mind. We've had so many of those individuals give us a call back, come back to LBMC, and now they're doing a great job here as well. So I really love those kind of boomerang stories. There's almost nothing that speaks more to the value of working at a company like this to me than that, because they went and tried it somewhere else, and turns out the grass wasn't so greener. And they really found that what they found here really meant a lot beyond even just their pay, the flexibility, the culture of the environment, and the true investment that you get from your shareholders and executives. So all of those things, I can't speak enough about those. Those things are. I could talk about every single one of my team and the individual stories and paths that they've taken, because it's personal, right? And work and home, there are things that are separate, but they impact each other. And so understanding that if somebody's struggling with something at home, they might bring that to work, not purposefully, but it's there, it's part of them. And so working through those situations and bringing more value to them than just their career, and how can we help them personally for what they're willing to share, that brings a lot of reward.
Yeah, and you really highlighted the importance, I think, of not taking it personally when an employee needs to leave or do something else. At the end of the day, they're doing it for them and their family, and you have to try and be understanding. I've worked with some hiring managers that have more of an ego about it, and they take it as a personal affront, and that's just not going to be. That's not going to make that employee want to return.
Yeah.
So it helps to actually give people a little bit of latitude and trust, and let them do what they need to do, and just be supportive. So completely agree. Love that approach. So just I guess one more final question here for you, Drew. We ask everybody, is there anything in the security industry that we're not talking about, but maybe we should be?
That's a good question, Pete, that we're not talking about that we should be. I think that maybe it gets talked about on security being important and having someone dedicated to the role in larger organizations, but in that middle market space, even if they are contractually obligated to get something like a SOC 2 report or a high trust certification, the approach that some companies want to take of security kind of being this bolt on function of someone in IT or someone in operations or in finance, and they're doing their best, but not truly investing in that role. So I think it's been and talked about maybe de nauseum at the larger organizations where it's finally kind of everyone has a CISO now, but you don't see that in the middle market still. And I think there's a lot of risk to that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve security in the middle market, and things like high trust and organizations that they work with, getting those built into contracts, or at least getting them thinking about it. But I think those organizations need to start thinking more about actual roles and responsibilities within the company that are more identified to something like a CISO and something more like a director of information security, at least someone that's their sole responsibility, not just kind of half the job or 30% of the job just so they can get a certification or a SOC report or pass a pen test or something like that. Someone that's truly got responsibility for security. That's one thing that I still see in the marketplace, even though you hear a lot more about it, hear about incidents all the time. It's still just not getting addressed at the middle market at the level that I'd like to see it.
Gotcha. And a solution for that could be not necessarily going for the CISO level person right away. Maybe you hire a generalist security engineer who's worked in a smaller company and has had their hands in a few different areas of security. Actually worked on a similar role not too long ago. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. I appreciate you being on, Drew. This has been a great conversation. I would love to have you on again sometime. If anybody would like to reach out to you and find you online, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so they can find me on LinkedIn, Drew Hendrickson, and then they can always email me. It's just drew.hendrickson@lbmc.com. And if you just Google Drew Hendrickson LBMC, both of those pop up pretty readily as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on, Drew, and see you later, everybody.
Thanks, Pete. See ya.